The stars were quiet, their light flickering faintly against the endless blackness of space. The *Eclipse*, an old but sturdy warship, drifted silently along the edge of the galaxy. Its crew moved about their tasks with practiced ease, their faces calm but tired. Captain Lucas Bennett stood on the bridge, staring out at the vast emptiness beyond the viewport. He had been in command for years, but this patrol felt different. Something about the silence made him uneasy. The ship's sensors beeped softly, breaking the stillness. Communications Officer Grace Lewis glanced up from her station, her brow furrowing as she studied the readings. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but curious, "we're picking up a signal. It's weak, but it's there." Lucas turned to face her, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "Where is it coming from?" Grace tapped a few keys, bringing up a map on the main screen. A blinking dot marked a distant planet, far beyond the usual routes traveled by ships. "It's Epsilon 9, she replied. "We haven't heard from that system in centuries. The colony there was abandoned long ago." Lucas crossed his arms, his mind racing. Abandoned colonies didn't just send out signals unless something, or someone, was trying to make contact. But orders were clear: avoid unnecessary risks. This wasn't their mission. Still, the thought of ignoring a potential distress call gnawed at him. He glanced at Rachel Dawson, the ship's navigator, who stood nearby. Her expression was unreadable, though he could tell she was thinking the same thing he was. "What do you think?" Lucas asked finally, his tone low. Rachel hesitated before answering. "It could be nothing, or it could be trouble. Either way, we don't have much info to go on." Engineer Daniel Hayes chimed in from his station. "If it's a distress signal, we can't just ignore it. That's not how we operate." Lucas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. They were right, of course. Turning away now would feel wrong, even if it meant stepping outside their orders. After a moment, he nodded. "Set a course for Epsilon 9. Let's see what we're dealing with." The crew sprang into action, adjusting the ship's trajectory. As the *Eclipse* moved closer to the source of the signal, the tension on the bridge grew thicker. The message repeated itself over and over, distorted by time and distance. It was garbled, almost impossible to understand. But one word came through clearly: SOS. Epsilon 9 loomed ahead, a barren and lifeless world shrouded in gray clouds. The planet looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades. As they entered orbit, the sensors picked up something strange beneath the surface, a massive structure buried deep within the rocky terrain. Whatever it wasn't natural. "That's no ordinary ruin," Daniel muttered, leaning closer to his monitor. "It's too big, too mechanical." Lucas frowned. "Can we get a clearer image?" Grace worked quickly, enhancing the scan data. When the picture sharpened, everyone froze. Buried under layers of rock and dust was the unmistakable shape of a giant humanoid machine. Its metallic frame towered over everything around it, its design both ancient and terrifying. "Titan 7, Rachel whispered, her voice tinged with awe and unease. "One of the war machines from the old days. I thought they were all destroyed." "So did I," Lucas said quietly. He stared at the image, his mind swirling with questions. Why was it here? Who had sent the signal? And most importantly, what dangers lay waiting for them on the surface? "We need to find out," he said after a moment, his voice firm. "Prepare a landing party. We're going down there." No one argued. The crew moved to carry out his orders, each person feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Whatever waited for them on Epsilon 9, it was clear that this mission would change everything, for better or worse. The landing party descended to the surface of Epsilon 9 in a small shuttle, its engines roaring against the eerie silence of the planet. The air outside was thick with dust, and the ground was cracked and barren, as though it had been scorched by some ancient catastrophe. Captain Lucas Bennett led the group, his boots crunching against the rocky terrain as they approached the massive shape buried beneath layers of debris. Behind him, Rachel Dawson adjusted her scanner, while Daniel Hayes carried a toolkit over one shoulder, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As they drew closer, the scale of Titan VII became even more overwhelming. The war machine was colossal, its metallic frame rusted and scarred from centuries of neglect. Its head, shaped like a helmet, tilted slightly forward, as if bowing under the weight of time. A faint hum emanated from deep within its core, suggesting that parts of it were still operational. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a relic. It was alive in some way, waiting. "This thing is huge," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced up at the towering figure, her face pale. "I've read about these machines, but seeing one in person, it's unsettling." Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the machine's surface. "It's amazing it's even standing after all this time. Whoever built these really knew what they were doing." Lucas didn't respond immediately. His focus was on the faint traces of activity around the base of Titan VII. Scattered tools and makeshift equipment suggested someone, or something, had been working here recently. He motioned for the others to follow him as he moved cautiously toward a narrow entrance carved into the side of the machine's leg. Inside, the air was cooler, and the walls were lined with exposed wires and blinking lights. The corridor was dimly lit, casting long shadows that danced across the metal floor. As they ventured deeper, they began to hear voices, soft, muffled sounds coming from somewhere ahead. Lucas raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. He peered around a corner and saw them, a group of people huddled together, their faces gaunt but determined. One of them stepped forward, a woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. Her name was Elena Carter, and she introduced herself as the leader of the survivors. She explained how her people had come to Epsilon 9 decades ago, seeking refuge from overcrowded colonies elsewhere. They had hoped to build a new life, but instead they found isolation and danger. When alien raiders attacked without warning, they had no choice but to awaken Titan VII, hoping it would protect them. It worked, at first, Elena said, her voice tight with frustration. But then it started acting strange. We couldn't control it anymore. It froze mid-battle, leaving us defenseless. Rachel frowned, glancing back at the towering machine looming above them. "You're lucky you survived it all. These things weren't meant to be tampered with." Elena's expression hardened. "We didn't have a choice. Those raiders would have wiped us out if we hadn't tried." Lucas listened carefully, weighing the situation. The survivors looked desperate, their clothes tattered and their bodies thin from hardship. Yet there was a fire in their eyes, a determination to keep fighting despite the odds. He knew they couldn't leave them here to fend for themselves, not with the raiders likely to return. But fixing Titan VII wouldn't be easy. The machine was old, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. "We'll help you," Lucas said finally, his tone firm. "But I can't promise anything. If we reactivate this thing, it could go wrong again. Are you willing to take that risk?" Elena hesitated only briefly before nodding. "We don't have any other options. If we don't fix it, we're dead anyway." With that decision made, the crew set to work. Daniel teamed up with Ryan Cole, the survivors' chief mechanic, to assess the damage. Together, they pored over schematics and traced faulty circuits, their hands moving quickly as they worked to repair the machine's systems. Rachel stayed close to Lucas, keeping an eye on the sensors and monitoring Titan VII's energy levels. Every now and then, the machine would groan or shudder, reminding them of the power they were dealing with. As hours passed, progress was slow but steady. Still, the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew the raiders could return at any moment, and if Titan VII wasn't ready, none of them would survive. Lucas pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. For now, all they could do was hope and work as fast as they could. The hours dragged on as the crew worked tirelessly to repair Titan VII. Daniel and Ryan Cole moved through the machine's labyrinthine interior, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they traced damaged wires and replaced faulty components. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil and burnt metal, and every step echoed loudly in the cavernous space. Outside, the wind howled across the barren landscape of Epsilon 9, carrying with it a sense of urgency that no one could ignore. Lucas stayed close to Elena, asking questions about the survivors and their lives on the planet. She spoke quietly, but with a strength that impressed him. Her people had endured hunger, isolation, and constant fear since arriving on Epsilon 9. They had hoped to build a new beginning, but instead, they found themselves fighting for survival against an enemy they couldn't understand. The alien raiders had come without warning, attacking with brutal efficiency. Titan 7 had been their only hope, but its malfunction left them vulnerable. "They're not like anything we've seen before," Elena said, her voice tight with anger. "They don't talk. They don't negotiate. They just take what they want and leave destruction behind." Lucas nodded, his jaw tightening. He had heard stories of such raiders, merciless scavengers who preyed on weak colonies, but seeing the evidence firsthand made it all too real. Burnt-out buildings and craters scared the land around them, remnants of earlier attacks. The survivors had done their best to rebuild, but their efforts were crumbling under the weight of repeated assaults. Rachel kept a close eye on the sensors, monitoring Titan 7's energy levels and structural integrity. Every now and then, the machine would emit a low groan or shudder violently, causing everyone to freeze in place. "It's unstable," she warned, glancing at Lucas. "If we push it too hard, it might collapse, or worse, turn on us." "We don't have a choice," Lucas replied firmly. "If we don't get this thing running, those raiders will finish what they started." Despite the risks, the work continued. Daniel and Ryan managed to restore power to one of Titan 7's arms, allowing it to move slightly for the first time in centuries. The sight sent a wave of hope through the survivors, who gathered nearby to watch. For a moment, it seemed possible that they might actually succeed. But as the repairs progressed, tensions began to rise. Some of the survivors grew restless, questioning whether reactivating Titan 7 was worth the danger. A man named Greg, one of Elena's closest advisors, voiced his concerns openly. "What if it turns on us again?" he demanded, glaring at Lucas. "We barely survived last time. How do we know it won't happen again?" Lucas met his gaze steadily. "We don't, but doing nothing guarantees your death. At least this way, you have a chance." Elena stepped in before the argument could escalate further. "Greg, we've been over this. We can't fight the raiders without Titan 7. If we don't try, we're already dead." Greg fell silent, though his expression remained troubled. He wasn't the only one feeling uneasy. Even some of the crew members whispered among themselves, wondering if they were making the right decision. Rachel, in particular, struggled with doubts. She trusted Lucas, but the thought of unleashing something so powerful and unpredictable worried her deeply. As night fell over Epsilon 9, the temperature dropped sharply, forcing everyone to retreat inside Titan 7's massive frame for warmth. The survivors huddled together, sharing stories of their lives before the colony and their dreams of escaping the planet. Lucas listened quietly, struck by their resilience. These people had lost everything, yet they still clung to hope. Daniel approached him later, wiping grease from his hands. "We're close," he said, his voice tinged with both excitement and unease. "Another few hours, and we might be able to bring it online." Lucas nodded, his mind racing. He knew the hardest part was yet to come. Reactivating Titan 7 was only half the battle. Controlling it would be another challenge entirely. As he looked around at the weary faces of the survivors and his own crew, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Failure wasn't an option, not when so many lives depended on their success. Outside, the wind continued to howl, carrying with it the promise of danger. Somewhere out there, the raiders were waiting, and when they returned, Titan 7 would either be humanity's salvation or its downfall. The next morning brought a cold, gray light to Epsilon 9. The crew and survivors gathered around Titan 7, their faces tense but resolute. After hours of relentless work, Daniel and Ryan had managed to restore power to most of the machine's systems. Its metallic frame hummed faintly, a low vibration that seemed to echo through the ground beneath their feet. For the first time in centuries, Titan 7 was close to awakening. Lucas stood near the base of the giant war machine, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the final preparations. He could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on him. If this didn't work, if Titan 7 failed or turned on them, it would be his decision that led to their downfall. But there was no turning back now. The raiders were out there, and they wouldn't wait forever. Rachel approached him, her scanner in hand. "Energy levels are stable," she said, her voice calm but tinged with unease. "But the neural core is still offline. Without it, we can't control the machine." Lucas nodded. "Can we activate it?" She hesitated before answering. "We can try, but interfacing with the neural core is risky. It wasn't designed for human input, not directly, anyway. Whoever does it will have to connect themselves to the system." Lucas glanced at the towering figure above them. The neural core was the heart of Titan 7, the part of the machine that allowed it to think and act independently. Reactivating it meant taking a leap into the unknown. He looked at his crew, then at the survivors. No one spoke, but their eyes told him everything he needed to know. They were counting on him. "I'll do it," Lucas said finally, his tone firm. Rachel stared at him, her expression hardening. "You can't. It's too dangerous. We don't know what kind of damage it could do to you, or to the machine." "It has to be me," Lucas replied. "I'm the captain. This is my responsibility." Before Rachel could argue further, Daniel stepped forward. "I'll go with you," he said. "If something goes wrong, I might be able to fix it from the inside." Lucas hesitated but eventually nodded. Together, they climbed up into Titan 7's cockpit, a small chamber located deep within its chest. The space was cramped and filled with blinking lights and exposed wires. In the center was the neural core, a pulsing sphere of energy encased in glass. It glowed faintly, casting an eerie light across the room. "This is it," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once we connect, there's no going back." Lucas took a deep breath and placed his hands on the control panel. A series of cables extended from the core, attaching themselves to his arms and temples. He felt a sharp sting as the connections locked into place, followed by a surge of electricity coursing through his body. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might pass out. Then the memories hit him. Images flooded his mind, scenes from battles long forgotten. He saw Titan 7 marching across alien landscapes, its massive fists crushing enemy ships and fortifications. He felt the machine's rage, its determination to protect humanity at any cost. But he also saw the destruction it left in its wake. Cities reduced to rubble, lives lost in the name of survival. The line between hero and monster blurred, leaving Lucas disoriented and overwhelmed. "Captain," Daniel's voice snapped him back to reality. "Are you okay?" Lucas blinked, shaking his head to clear it. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. "The core is active. We need to test the controls." Slowly, Lucas moved his hands over the panel, sending commands to the machine. Titan 7 responded, its massive limbs shifting and groaning as it came to life. Outside, the survivors gasped in awe as the giant rose to its full height, towering over the barren landscape like a god of war. But something was wrong. The machine's movements were jerky and unpredictable, as though it were struggling to obey. Rachel shouted from below, warning them that the energy levels were spiking dangerously high. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared, and the neural core began to pulse erratically. "We're losing control," Daniel yelled, frantically working to stabilize the system. Lucas clenched his teeth, focusing every ounce of his willpower on keeping the machine steady. Sweat dripped down his face as he fought against the overwhelming force of Titan 7's programming. For a moment, it felt like the machine was fighting back, resisting his commands. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the chaos subsided. Titan 7 stood motionless, its massive frame trembling slightly but otherwise stable. Lucas slumped against the control panel, exhausted but alive. Outside, Alina and the others cheered, their voices filled with relief and hope. But Lucas knew better. This was only the beginning. Reactivating Titan 7 had been a victory, but controlling it would be another battle entirely. And when the raiders returned, they would find a weapon unlike anything they had faced before. The calm didn't last long. As the crew and survivors celebrated their success, a sudden alarm blared from the asterisk, Eclipse asterisk still in orbit above Epsilon 9. Grace Lewis's voice crackled over the comms, sharp with urgency. "Captain, we've got incoming ships, multiple contacts. They're moving fast." Lucas's heart sank as he stepped out of Titan 7's cockpit and looked toward the sky. In the distance, dark shapes emerged from the horizon. Alien raiders, their jagged ships cutting through the atmosphere like blades. The attack had begun. "Everyone, take cover," Lucas shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The survivors scrambled to find shelter behind the ruins of their colony, clutching whatever weapons they had managed to salvage. Daniel and Ryan quickly climbed down from Titan 7, joining the others on the ground. Rachel stayed close to Lucas, her face pale but determined. Titan 7 loomed above them, its massive frame casting a shadow over the battlefield. It was operational, but barely. Lucas knew it wouldn't hold together for long under sustained fire. Still, it was their only chance. "Get ready," Lucas said to Daniel. "We might need to push this thing harder than it can handle." The first wave of raiders hit hard. Their ships unleashed beams of energy that tore into the ground, sending debris flying in all directions. The air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Survivors screamed as explosions erupted around them, but Alina kept them focused, shouting orders and directing them to return fire with whatever they had. Titan 7 roared to life, its arms swinging wildly as it charged forward. The machine moved clumsily at first, its systems still unstable, but it quickly found its footing. With a thunderous crash, one of its massive fists smashed into an alien ship, sending it spiraling to the ground in flames. Cheers erupted from the survivors below, but the victory was short-lived. More raiders poured in, their numbers overwhelming. Inside the cockpit, Lucas fought to maintain control. The neural core pulsed erratically, flooding his mind with flashes of past battles. He could feel the machine's power surging through him, but it was slipping away, fighting against his commands. Sweat dripped down his face as he clenched the controls, forcing Titan 7 to obey. "They're targeting the core," Rachel shouted from below, pointing at the enemy ships circling the giant machine. Beams of energy struck Titan 7's chest, causing sparks to fly and alarms to blare inside the cockpit. The vibrations were so strong that Lucas nearly lost his grip. "We can't keep this up," Daniel yelled, his voice strained. He was back inside the machine now, working furiously to reroute power and stabilize the systems. "The frame is cracking under the stress." Lucas gritted his teeth, his hands trembling as he guided Titan 7 into another attack. The machine's other fist slammed down onto a group of raiders, crushing them beneath its weight. But the effort came at a cost. Cracks spread across its metallic surface, and the hum of its engines grew louder, almost deafening. On the ground, Alina led the survivors in a desperate counterattack. Armed with makeshift weapons and sheer determination, they fired at the raiders' smaller ground units, distracting them long enough for Titan 7 to regroup. Ryan Cole worked alongside the colonists, using his engineering skills to rig traps that slowed the enemy's advance. Despite their efforts, the battle was far from over. The raiders seemed endless, their ships swarming like insects. One by one, the survivors fell, their bodies disappearing beneath clouds of dust and smoke. Even Titan 7 was beginning to falter, its movements slower and more erratic. Lucas felt the strain deep in his bones. The neural core burned in his mind, its power both a gift and a curse. He knew they couldn't hold out much longer. If something didn't change soon, they would all be wiped out. "Daniel," Lucas called, his voice hoarse. "Is there anything else you can do?" Daniel hesitated, his hands flying over the controls. "There's one option," he said finally, "but it'll overload the system. We might lose the machine completely." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Do it." As Daniel initiated the final sequence, Titan 7 let out a deafening roar. Its eyes glowed brighter, and its limbs moved with newfound speed and precision. For a brief moment, it became unstoppable, a force of nature unleashed upon the raiders. Ships exploded in rapid succession, their wreckage raining down on the battlefield. But the cost was clear. Titan 7's frame began to buckle under the strain, its metal skin tearing apart. Sparks flew everywhere, and the cockpit shook violently. Lucas held on tightly, knowing that this might be the end. For all of them, Titan 7 was falling apart, its massive frame groaning under the strain of the overload. The machine's movements were erratic but devastating, each step shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. Its arms swung with incredible force, smashing through alien ships and sending them spiraling to the ground in flames. The raiders' numbers dwindled rapidly, their attacks growing more desperate as they realized they were facing something far beyond their understanding. Inside the cockpit, Lucas fought to stay focused. The neural core pulsed violently, flooding his mind with images and emotions that weren't his own. He saw flashes of Titan 7's past battles, its victories and its failures. He felt the machine's anger, its hunger for destruction, and its reluctance to obey human commands. It was alive in a way he hadn't anticipated, and it was fighting back. "Hold on," Daniel shouted from behind him, his hands working furiously at a panel of controls. "The system is overheating faster than I thought." Lucas ignored him, his eyes locked on the battlefield outside. The survivors were holding their ground, firing at the remaining raiders with everything they had. Belina led them with fierce determination, her voice cutting through the chaos as she urged her people to keep fighting. But even with Titan 7's help, the odds were still against them. The machine couldn't last much longer. A loud crack echoed through the cockpit as one of Titan 7's arms tore free from its socket. The giant staggered, nearly toppling over before regaining its balance. Sparks flew everywhere, and smoke filled the air. Lucas could feel the heat radiating from the controls, burning his hands, but he didn't let go. If he did, the machine would collapse, and so would any hope of survival. "We're losing it," Daniel yelled, panic creeping into his voice. "The core is going to explode." Lucas clenched his teeth, his mind racing. There was only one way to end this. He reached for the final override switch, a small lever marked with a warning label about catastrophic failure. Pulling it would push Titan 7 beyond its limits, unleashing its full power, but it would also destroy the machine completely. "Do it," Lucas said, his voice firm despite the fear gripping his chest. Daniel hesitated, his eyes wide. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Lucas replied. "If we don't stop them now, none of us will make it out alive." With a deep breath, Daniel flipped the switch. The cockpit lit up like a star, the neural core glowing brighter than ever before. Titan 7 let out an ear-splitting roar, its body surging with energy. Outside, the survivors watched in awe as the machine transformed into a towering inferno of light and power. The raiders tried to retreat, their ships turning away from the battlefield, but it was too late. Titan 7 unleashed a massive blast of energy, obliterating everything in its path. Alien ships exploded in fiery bursts, their wreckage scattering across the sky. The ground shook violently, and the air filled with the deafening sound of destruction. But the victory came at a cost. Inside the cockpit, the temperature soared, and the metal walls began to melt. Lucas knew they had only seconds left before the machine collapsed entirely. "Get out," he shouted to Daniel. "Now." Daniel didn't argue. He turned and sprinted toward the exit, leaping out just as the cockpit started to crumble. Lucas stayed behind, his hands still gripping the controls. He couldn't leave, not yet. Not until he was sure the job was done. Outside, the survivors watched in horror as Titan VII began to fall apart. Its massive frame buckled under the strain, its limbs breaking off one by one. With a final, earth-shaking crash, the machine collapsed into a heap of twisted metal and smoke. The battlefield fell silent, save for the faint crackle of flames and the distant cries of the wounded. Belina ran toward the wreckage, her heart pounding. She called out Lucas's name, her voice trembling with fear. For a moment, she thought they had lost him too. Then a figure emerged from the smoke. Lucas stumbled forward, his uniform scorched, and his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily, but alive. The survivors erupted into cheers, their voices filled with relief and gratitude. Belina knelt beside Lucas, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved us." Lucas managed a weak smile, though his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. "We did it," he corrected her. "All of us." As the survivors gathered around, helping the wounded and tending to the injured, Lucas looked back at the remains of Titan VII. The war machine was gone, but its sacrifice had given them a chance to live. For now, that was enough. The battlefield was eerily quiet after the chaos of the fight. Smoke hung heavy in the air, and the ground was littered with debris, shattered metal from alien ships, fragments of Titan VII's massive frame, and the charred remains of the raiders' weapons. The survivors moved slowly, their faces pale but filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. They worked together to care for the wounded, sharing what little supplies they had left. Belina stood at the center of it all, her voice steady as she directed people to help where they could. Lucas sat on the ground nearby, his back against a piece of wreckage. His hands were burned, his body ached, and his mind felt numb from the strain of controlling Titan VII. Rachel knelt beside him, wrapping his wounds with strips of cloth torn from her own uniform. She didn't say much, but her expression said enough. They had won, but the cost had been high. Daniel approached them, his face smudged with soot and his hands trembling slightly. "We got lucky," he said, his voice low. "If Titan VII hadn't held out just a little longer, we'd all be dead." "No luck," Lucas replied, shaking his head. "Just stubbornness." He managed a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. The weight of what had happened pressed down on him, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, and the knowledge that Titan VII was gone forever. In the distance, Ryan Cole and a group of survivors sifted through the wreckage of the alien ships, searching for anything useful. They found weapons, scraps of technology, and even some food. It wasn't much, but it would help them survive a little longer. Greg, who had doubted Lucas earlier, walked over to him now, his face filled with shame and gratitude. "I was wrong about you," Greg admitted, his voice rough. "You did what needed to be done. We owe you everything." Lucas nodded but didn't respond. He didn't feel like a hero. All he could think about was the machine that had saved them, and the memories it had left behind. The neural core had shown him things he couldn't forget. The destruction Titan VII had caused, the lives it had taken, and the fine line between savior and destroyer. Those images haunted him now, even as the survivors celebrated their victory. Elena joined them after checking on her people. She looked tired but determined. "What happens now?" she asked, glancing at Lucas. He hesitated before answering. "Now, we rebuild. You've got the tools and supplies from the raider ships. Use them to fortify your colony. Make sure it doesn't happen again." "And you?" Elena asked, her green eyes locking onto his. "What will you do?" Lucas glanced at the *Eclipse*, still visible in orbit above them. "We'll report back to command. Tell them what happened here. Maybe they'll send help, or maybe they won't. Either way, you're on your own for now." Helena nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around at the survivors, their faces bruised but hopeful. These people had endured unimaginable hardship, yet they still found strength to keep going. It reminded him why he had chosen this life, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As night fell over Epsilon 9, the crew of the Eclipse prepared to leave. The shuttle descended from orbit, landing near the remains of Titan 7. Rachel, Daniel, and the others climbed aboard, casting one last look at the battered colony before taking their seats. Lucas stayed behind for a moment, standing beside Alina. "You're stronger than you think," he told her. "Don't let fear hold you back." Alina smiled faintly. "I won't. Not anymore." With that, Lucas turned and boarded the shuttle. As it lifted off the ground, he watched the survivors grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared beneath the smoke and dust. The Eclipse loomed ahead, its lights blinking faintly against the darkness of space. Back on the ship, the mood was somber. Grace Lewis greeted them on the bridge, her face lined with worry. "Command isn't going to like this," she said quietly. "They'll want answers." "They'll get them," Lucas replied, his voice firm. "But first, we rest." He retreated to his quarters, closing the door behind him. The memories of Titan 7 lingered in his mind, refusing to fade. He knew the battle had changed him, and not just because of the physical scars. He had faced something far greater than himself and survived, but the cost weighed heavily on his soul. For now, though, there was peace. The raiders were gone, and the survivors had a chance to start over. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. As the Eclipse drifted further into space, Lucas allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Humanity had faced its darkest hour on Epsilon 9, and somehow it had endured. That thought gave him hope, for the future, and for the people he had sworn to protect. The Eclipse drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming softly as it carried its crew further from Epsilon 9. Inside the ship, life returned to a fragile sense of normalcy, though the weight of what had happened lingered in every corner. The crew moved about their tasks quietly, their faces marked by exhaustion and reflection. None of them spoke much, but their shared experience bound them together in ways words never could. Lucas stood on the bridge, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. His hands rested lightly on the railing, his mind replaying the events on Epsilon 9 over and over again. Titan 7's final roar echoed in his thoughts, its sacrifice burning brighter than any victory he had known. He felt a mix of pride and sorrow, a bittersweet reminder of the cost of survival. Rachel approached him, her steps hesitant. She didn't say anything at first, simply standing beside him as they both gazed at the void beyond the viewport. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Lucas turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "It doesn't matter what I think," he said slowly. "What matters is that those people are alive because of what we did. That's enough for me." Rachel nodded, though her eyes remained troubled. "I just keep thinking about Titan 7. What if it had turned on us? What if we'd made things worse?" "We'll never know," Lucas replied. "But sometimes, doing nothing is worse than taking a risk." Those survivors didn't have time to wait for perfect answers. They needed help, so we gave it to them. His words seemed to ease some of Rachel's unease, though not completely. She glanced back at the others on the bridge, her gaze lingering on Daniel and Grace, who were quietly discussing their next course of action. Everyone was carrying the same burden, each in their own way. Yet, despite the scars, physical and emotional, they had come through it together. Later that day, Lucas gathered the crew in the main meeting room. The mood was tense but focused as he addressed them. "We're heading back to report what happened," he began, his tone steady. "Command isn't going to like hearing about Titan 7, or the risks we took, but we'll tell them the truth, every detail." Daniel raised a hand slightly, his voice cautious. "Do you think they'll punish us for disobeying orders?" Lucas shook his head. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see why we did what we did. Either way, we followed our duty. That's all anyone can ask of us. Grace chimed in, her voice soft but firm. And what about Alina and the others? Will they send help? I don't know, Lucas admitted, but I'll make sure Command understands how much they've been through. And how much they still need. The meeting ended with a quiet resolve. The crew returned to their stations, preparing for the long journey ahead. As the Eclipse continued its voyage, the memories of Epsilon 9 stayed fresh in their minds. They had faced something extraordinary, a relic of humanity's past brought back to life, and watched it fall in a blaze of glory. It was a story that would stay with them forever. Days later, the ship approached its home base, a sprawling station orbiting a distant planet. The sight of it filled the crew with mixed emotions. Relief washed over them at the thought of rest, but anxiety lingered about what awaited them. Would their actions be praised or condemned? Only time would tell. As they docked, Lucas stepped off the ship first, his posture straight and his expression calm. He led his crew through the corridors, ignoring the curious stares of others. When they reached the debriefing room, command officers waited, their faces unreadable. Lucas took a deep breath and began his report, laying out every detail without hesitation. Hours later, the debriefing ended. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of concern and respect. One of them finally spoke. "You took a great risk, Captain Bennett, but you saved lives. We'll consider your actions carefully." Lucas nodded, his jaw tight. "That's all I ask." Back aboard the Eclipse, the crew gathered once more. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing. They had done their best, and they had survived. For now, that was enough. As the ship prepared to leave the station, Lucas stood on the bridge again, looking out at the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but also possibilities. Humanity had faced its darkest hour, and it had endured. And as long as there were people willing to fight for a better tomorrow, hope would always find a way to shine through the darkness.